Snow Pines, a small town in the snowy mountains of Colorado, has always been famous for its Christmas traditions. A huge Christmas tree on the central square, houses decorated with thousands of lights, and children's letters to Santa created the perfect festive atmosphere. This year, children diligently wrote their wishes and left the letters in a red mailbox near the city hall, which had a symbolic inscription to the North Pole. Billy Carter, a 10-year-old boy, also left his letter. His younger sister Lisa, a 6-year-old curious girl, was drawing Santa, dreaming of gifts. Their home was full of warmth and comfort, but this year it felt different. In recent days, people in the city have been noticing strange things. A postman from the mayor's office found several letters that came back with the inscription, "Wrong address." This was puzzling, but no one could explain what had happened. That evening, Billy and Lisa and their friends went to the square to see the main Christmas tree. The atmosphere was festive, but there was anxiety in the crowd. One of the letters fell out of the red box and was picked up by an old man in a black coat. His movements seemed unnatural, and his face was hidden behind a long scarf. He put the letter in his pocket and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, there were envelopes at the door of the Carter house. One had Billy's name on it, the other Lisa's. Both contained identical notes in sloppy, capitalized letters that indicated they had been naughty. The backs of the envelopes were covered with strange rune-like symbols. The atmosphere of the house was filled with fear. The mother, who saw the notes, thought it was a prank and did not attach any importance to it. At night, the situation escalated. Christmas tree decorations began to disappear on the streets, and the red box near the city hall was empty. A man in a dark cloak stood by the box, directing his piercing gaze at the Carter house. His eyes glowed with a red light that pierced the darkness, creating an eerie atmosphere. As the clock struck midnight, the city was enveloped in eerie laughter coming from the direction of the box, reminding us that danger was at hand. Christmas Eve in Snow Pines began with a gentle snowfall that gently enveloped the town, adding to the coziness and quiet. But the atmosphere in the Carter home was full of anxiety. After receiving the strange letters, Billy and Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. They tried not to show fear, but even their mother began to notice how an unusual silence enveloped the neighborhood. Closer to midnight, even stranger things began to happen in the town. The Christmas tree lights on the central square suddenly went out, and heavy sounds, like sledges creaking and chains jingling, were heard over the roofs of the houses. Residents looking out of their windows saw only shadows moving quickly in the direction of the city hall. The darkness seemed alive, as if it embraced every corner of the city. The Carter house became eerily quiet until the clock struck midnight. At that moment, a heavy stomping sound was heard on the roof, and a red light flashed through the snow. Her mother went to the window, but saw nothing. Lisa hid under the blanket, and Billy, gathering all his courage, looked out into the darkness. He noticed the silhouette of a huge hooded figure watching the house from across the street. His eyes were glowing like fires, and his cloak was billowing behind him like black smoke. The next morning, most of the townspeople noticed that boxes wrapped in black paper with red ribbon had appeared at their doors. There were no usual Christmas presents inside, only creepy dolls with twisted faces and caricatured smiles. Billy's box contained a broken clock with hands moving in the opposite direction. Lisa's box contained a plush toy that made a creepy laugh when touched. In the central square, where holiday fairs were always held, there was now a ruined tent with the remains of Christmas decorations. The area was full of deep hoof prints. No one could explain what had happened, but fear began to grip the residents. Rumors that Santa was behaving strangely this year were spreading through the city. Someone saw his figure gliding over the rooftops at night, but instead of merry laughter, they heard a sound like chains jingling and heavy breathing. The town was paralyzed with terror. Billy and Lisa tried to tell their neighbors about the strange events, but everyone was afraid to even speak out loud. No one dared to leave their homes after dark. Only one thing was clear. It was not the Santa everyone was expecting, but something much worse. The horrific events in Snow Pines continued to escalate. The townspeople, frightened by the creepy gifts and missing decorations, began to look for answers. Rumors were spreading among children that Santa was taking the naughty into his sack this year, and that there was no longer a safe place. Everyone tried not to leave the house after dark, but even at home, they did not feel safe. Billy, Lisa, and their neighbor Jake, a teenager with a curiosity for myths and legends, decided to find out what was going on. At the local library, they came across an old book that looked like a folklore collection. It described the legend of Krampus, a demonic creature who once used the image of Santa to punish naughty children. Krampus appeared in the world of people in those years when the true spirit of Christmas was weakening due to human greed and indifference. The children learned that Krampus replaced Santa when he became weak or disappeared. The legend also said that he can be driven away by restoring the true Christmas spirit, sacrifice, kindness, and faith in the magic of the holiday. But anyone who encounters Krampus risks being trapped in his eternal sack, where souls remain trapped forever. The book also mentioned a magical ritual that could be performed to exorcise Krampus. This required Christmas items filled with true love and memories. Jake suggested that such things might be in his grandmother's house, which had antique ornaments and souvenirs that had belonged to their family for generations. While the children were discussing their plan, they heard a strange noise coming from the street. Billy looked out the window and saw a huge figure sliding through the fog in the distance. It was holding a heavy sack, and muffled voices were coming out of it, like crying. The figure moved from house to house, leaving a reddish trail in the snow. The children realized that there was almost no time left. They quickly packed up and headed for Jake's grandmother's house, which stood on the outskirts of town. On the way, they felt like someone was watching them. The shadows seemed to come to life, and the wind brought the eerie jingle of chains and low breathing. When they got to the house, they found the items they were looking for: an old Christmas ball that had once belonged to Jake's grandmother, a garland made by his mother's hands, and a small angel figurine that had been decorating the tree for decades. As they were leaving the house, the darkness suddenly grew even thicker, and the figure of Krampus appeared right in front of them. He was huge, with curled horns and eyes that glowed with red fire. His cloak, which seemed to be alive, developed as if to enhance the frosty wind. In his hands he held a sack, from which the trembling, translucent faces of the children peered out. Krampus began to approach, and each step seemed like an earthquake. The children froze in their tracks, but Billy quickly commanded them to run to an abandoned church in the center of town, which was mentioned in legend as a protected place. There they planned to perform a ritual and try to stop the monster. Krampus rushed after them, and the city was plunged into chaos. Hoof prints were left in the snow, and the air was filled with the loud ringing of chains and chilling laughter. The abandoned church stood in the center of Snow Pines, half covered in snow and covered in ivy. It had once been a symbol of the town's unity, but now its Gothic architecture and broken windows looked gloomy, as if waiting for the last act of a Christmas drama. The children ran to the door, out of breath, and hoping that this place was indeed protected from Krampus. Inside, the church seemed colder than outside. The light of their flashlights reflected off the old wooden benches and stained glass windows, which were only partially preserved. They laid out the Christmas items they had brought on the altar as instructed in the book. It seemed that the building itself was trying to help them. The faint sound of bells rang in the air, although the church had no bell tower. Outside, the loud clanging of chains and the stomping of hooves announced the approach of Krampus. The walls of the church shook as he approached the door. His figure looked even larger and more ominous in the moonlight. A black cloak enveloped his figure, and the ghosts of the children whose souls he had taken continued to peek out from the sack on his shoulder. Krampus took a few steps and stopped at the entrance, as if to see if he could enter. The children, barely containing their panic, began to perform the ritual. They read the words from the book while holding Christmas objects in their hands. Each symbolized something important: love, hope, and faith in the magic of the holiday. But Krampus was not going to wait. His loud roar broke the silence, and the church doors burst open as if struck by a storm. He entered, his horns touching the high ceilings and his cloak mingling with the darkness. Krampus swung the chains that wrapped around the pews, sweeping them out of place. The children were forced to retreat to the altar, but they did not stop the ritual. Lisa held the angel, which began to glow as she read the next phrase from the book. The angel's light filled the room, causing Krampus to freeze. His eyes glowed even brighter, but he clearly couldn't get any closer. Jake picked up the orb that had belonged to his grandmother. It showed a picture of a happy family celebrating Christmas. When he said the words, golden dust began to pour out of the ball, creating a barrier between Krampus and the children. The monster roared, realizing that his strength was weakening. He threw the bag to the floor, where ghostly figures began to emerge to attack the children. Billy, holding a garland made by his mother's hands, threw it towards Krampus. The garland burst into flames, surrounding the monster. The fire did not physically harm him, but he began to curl up, as if the darkness could no longer sustain his form. Krampus took one last step toward the altar, but the magical light created by the objects completely engulfed him. His roar subsided, and with it the jingle of chains. The sack he left behind turned to ash, and the ghosts of the children disappeared, as if they had found peace. Silence reigned in the church, but it was no longer oppressive. It resembled the dawn after a storm. The children went outside, and for the first time in days, the sky above Snow Pines was clear and the stars shone brightly. The town was calm again, but they knew that this was a Christmas they would remember forever. In the distance, they saw a small Christmas bell lying in the snow. Lisa picked it up, but the sound it made seemed familiar and disturbing. Evil could return, but this time they were ready to fight back.